WNST. Since the Baltimore Orioles have announced the direction, Mike Elias holding a press conference for some members of the media, answering some questions from the media, and certainly I think we've heard the end of Lou and John Angelos for a long period of time. Luke Jones joins us now. I sort of bunkered down Luke with this book, and I'm going to continue to promote it. I have no stake in it other than I am a writer myself, and I feel like I've written a couple of good books. This is a great book. Astro Ball, The New Way to Win It All by Ben Reiter. Luke, you're getting the gifted version of this. It's got some of my cat's teeth marks on page 42 and 44, and I broke the orange highlighter out for you, and I may go through this a little bit as you're giving me your soliloquy on Sig Mejdal, and that is the proper pronunciation for a name that has an interesting spelling. There's a whole Scandinavian background to Sig Mejdal. There's a whole Yale background to Mike Elias. It's a fascinating story. I'm excited to maybe at one point get my press pass back and get to know these gentlemen a little bit. But there's a new game in town, and there's plenty to talk about. I don't know that these will be familiar names as players, but much like when the Ravens brought Brian Billick in, we wanted to know about him, or John Harbaugh, we wanted to know that he was more than Jim's brother. There's a real story and breadcrumb popcorn trail of success, right? That starts in St. Louis and goes to Houston. And these guys have taken this thing on really, and I think once there's a press conference, we're going to learn that these guys wanted the worst situation so that they could put their nerd theory and their NASA science in the new world 12 years later after they started putting this stuff together in St. Louis and see if they can take the neighborhood that no one wanted, Anacostia, and turn it into something special. And, I tip my cap to these guys because they've got rings, they're decorated, they clearly got highly compensated by the Angelos family. Nice to know that some of our massive money went somewhere. But, if it goes to these two geniuses and they can fix it, dude, I know you're watching it closer than I am, and I know you're looking forward to getting to know about these guys.
Yeah, and it's going to be something that's a process. I think that's obvious. But when you have two individuals like Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal who had success, they've been with two different organizations and places that are very reputable. Certainly St. Louis and what Houston became here in recent years.
Well, St. Louis was reputable until they stole all their stuff.
Well, yeah, right. But just in terms of a successful organization,
of course,
being part of that fabric, and for them to come to Baltimore. I mean, we talked about it before the hires were made. That I absolutely believed that when you have something that is scorched earth, something that's at the bottom of the barrel, something that's as close to a true clean slate as you're going to get. And it's never fully clear, but this is pretty close, especially when you look at the number of individuals who have left. I mean, there's a few holdovers, with Brady Anderson being the big one at this point. And
the
how
Swiss
that will
Army knife, man. Swiss Army knife, yes.
But how that will play out will be very interesting, and how he will be utilized. And if Mike Elias truly has the autonomy that the Angelos sons have said he will have, how that plays out will be very interesting. But these are two individuals who are good baseball people, and Elias on the scouting side specifically, and we call them nerds, and it's really
they call themselves nerds, by the way.
Sure.
Their room was called the Nerd Cave in Houston.
But it
literally
really is a term of affinity now, because every team has to have this. I mean, as Elias said during his press conference, this isn't a preference. This is a necessity now to use analytics and to find every edge you can find, to try to find competitive advantages, to try to find hidden value that other teams don't find. And it's different now than it was 15, 16, 17 years ago with Billy Beane in Oakland, where the real notable revelation was how much they valued on-base percentage. Well, everyone values on-base percentage now. So you look back to where the Orioles were 6, 7 years ago with Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter. They were one of the first teams that truly embraced infield shifting. Everyone shifts now, so you're always
the Oriole way was on 3x5 notebook cards with Earl Weaver was all in his head.
Exactly. So it's not as though analytics are this brand new, this brand new idea. it's always existed to some degree. It's just now there's no. I mean, it's not pulling back the curtain because they're not going to broadcast every single thing they're trying to do. But it's common knowledge that every team has this, and I want to be very clear about it. The Orioles had this under Dan Duquette. They had analytics. It wasn't prioritized. There was a problem with it being siloed, so to speak, that the analytics department was kept away from the baseball club, and the reasons for that, you can really point to some of the distrust, some of the dysfunction between Duquette and Showalter, especially as time went on here in Baltimore. I mean, think back a couple years ago to Dan Duquette talking about Adam Jones positioning in center field. Well, Adam Jones bristled at that. Why? Because he didn't have access to the information that the Orioles analysts had on that. So, and that's where Sig Mejdal is really going to come in here. If you look at his background, everyone talks about NASA. Everyone talks about him being a sabermetrician and a nerd. But 2 years ago, he spent time in the Astros minor league system as I believe it was a short single season or short single A, a coach for their short season single A team.
He went up to upstate New York, yes,
right,
and stood on a baseball field at first base and put a uniform on. And dude, he was a NASA nerd who just loved baseball and played. He didn't play Stratomatic. He played like a different game. I'm looking through the book now because did you ever play any of those games? I mean, you're a little older for that. I'm 50.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with it, but I can't really.
You
say
had
that
legitimate rotisserie in your era.
Right.
In my era, we played Stratomatic. He played another game. There was APBA. It was another game, but that wasn't the one he played. He played one that none of my friends played. I don't even remember what the hell it was called, but anyway, I'll look it up. But he was literally just a lifer fan who always nerded out on stats for baseball players and wondered why baseball wasn't more inclined for the important stats. Like, I always figured out in the 80s playing Stratomatic that walk was as good as a single. It got me on base, and it gave me a better chance to score a run. And, I was no sabermetrician or calculus major, even algebra 2 major, but, I mean, I was pretty good at adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. And, quite frankly, my father taught me math by teaching me batting averages in 1973, literally.
Right. I mean, the information has always been there to some degree, but as time has gone on, we have even more of it. But getting back to the point I was making about Mejdal, the fact that he was a coach in their minor league system 2 years ago, the fact that he was more of a rover last year, that's the big key here. It's great to have information. It's great to be analytical and have a research department, but how are you applying that? Because I can give you a bunch of new wave stats that look really technical, and they have these complicated formulas, but how are you applying that for your major league roster? How are you making your players better? How are you making your coaches better by using that? And that's where the disconnect lied, where that was with the Orioles over the last couple years after they had been kind of cutting edge for a while. I mean, think about the things we talk about: infield shifting, launch angle.
When you're the only one doing it, it's a real market advantage. When everyone's doing it and doing it well with the same information, and drilling down because the Yankees have 14 guys doing this and the Reds have one, or whatever. It really adds an advantage on top of an advantage, right? It's like Thursday night football at home, or it's I don't even know what that would be. But once everyone sort of catches up, and we're sort of getting there now, I mean, the market advantage these guys had going to Houston, where everyone thought they didn't know what they were talking about. Now, most every team in baseball is doing some level of this as well, or copying it, or there's a whole Astro way. We bought into it here and hired the guys, but there's 5 other places where they're trying to sell this to their fan base.
Right. I mean, everyone's using analytics. Again, it's how are you applying it? How committed are you to it? How cutting edge are you? Or are you a team that's trying to play catch up? The Orioles, when they hired Dan Duquette, they weren't known as being a cutting-edge organization. I mean, even though Andy McPhail had done a good job in the core that he built, that obviously came to fruition after he left. But, when Dan Duquette came, there was some innovation there. There were some things where the Orioles became cutting edge, but it became stagnant. It really stalled, and how much of that was just the organization not committing to it in terms of finances and resources? That was certainly part of it. And as I mentioned before, some of the disconnect that existed between Duquette and Buck Showalter, that's where some of that analytical information, some of that research that kind of died on the analytics side rather than getting to the players and having it applied. And I think that was very telling. And I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Guys like Kevin Gausman, Zach Britton, and Manny Machado, and this was talked about in the playoffs with Machado. While there was so much talk about his on-field demeanor and the Johnny Hustle comments and everything like that, one of the big stories that the Dodgers were able to accomplish with him defensively was they moved his positioning a couple steps towards second base, and at least from a metric standpoint, that improved his defense. Now, I think there was also something to be said of he also had half a season of shortstop under his belt, and I think that's part of it too, just the fact that he was back at a new position that he hadn't played in a long time. But those individuals all spoke about the access to the information that they had with their new clubs that frankly just wasn't there, or was there on a much less, a lesser scale with the Orioles. So that's where Mejdal comes in, the staff that they're going to hire. It's not just researching. It's not just having the information. It's deciphering what exactly is going to help your players. And
a guy like Verlander figured that out when he came in from Detroit, which was an old world,
right.
Illich world, or whatever, and all of a sudden it becomes something else. And he saw it right away. That's documented in the book. And I think trying to sell it to the players, early on, trying to sell it to Dallas Keuchel, who came from Oklahoma and was old school, was a bit of a stretch. But once they saw the way this worked to help them win baseball games, hey, man, I know we talk a lot of football around here, right? And we're going to have some of the offensive linemen out of Patrick's and Essex. And I think it's a tough sell to the fan base to run this game of rugby the Ravens are playing, except that they've won 2 games. Once you start winning games, you're like, well, maybe we don't have to throw it around as much. Maybe we could do this differently. And I think anytime there's a philosophical change in anything, right, anywhere, that's what you're up against. The pioneers get the arrows, as they say.
And the question that you hear, and I'm glad you brought up the Ravens because it's a perfect example. Is it sustainable? And that was always the knock on Billy Beane in Oakland back in the early 2000s. Okay, this works for the regular season, but is it going to work in the postseason? Even though we all should know better by now that you get to the postseason and it is far more chance involved than people really want to admit, if we're being totally honest.
But there's a human element that I think that comes into all of this, that when you make a deal for Verlander that doesn't make any sense because you're giving away a bunch of prospects, which is completely outside the realm of your comfort level, that there comes a human element in all of this to have a gut feel about pinch hitting for someone, or saying that guy's got the stomach flu tonight, or that guy's shoulder's a little banged. All of that goes into that. It isn't just a statistical game, right? It isn't just rotisserie baseball.
And I think the most successful baseball people that are, do define themselves as a, quote, nerd or a sabermetrician is they understand that there absolutely are variables at work that you either can't quantify or we haven't figured out how to quantify. And if you understand that and you don't ignore that, and that's where you get into sometimes you do have to do something that's a little more unconventional, quote, a gut feeling, whatever it might be. Those types of things shouldn't be driving what you do, but those types of things certainly are part of the entire equation. So I just think where they stand right now with Mejdal, certainly they're going to have a beefed-up analytics department. They talked about that back in the summer before Dan Duquette even left and all of that. But again, there's the talent collection that they have to have, which that's going to be such a big part of this right now. It's great to talk about analytics, and certainly you hope it's going to help guys like Trey Mancini and Michael Givens and Jonathan Villar and guys that are on the roster right now. But the big piece for this rebuild isn't going to be what they do from an analytics standpoint on the field with their 25-man roster. It's going to be collecting talent, using different information to discover talent. Whether you're talking about sports science type stuff or just looking at other information. I mean, I think one thing that you point to with the Astros, with players that they identified, pitchers they identified, they were one of the teams that really talked about spinning the baseball, spin rate, guys that throw curveballs. And you've kind of seen this, and this is one area where the Orioles fell behind the last 3 or 4 years. Take a look at the percent. As much as we talk about the velocity in the game, take a look at the percentage of fastballs being thrown now compared to in the past. It's not nearly as high. Why? Because breaking balls, spin rate, you're trying to spin the baseball as much as you can. And that's a big thing that the Astros did. Look at what some of the guys they used in their World Series run a couple years ago. I mean, Charlie Morton, McCullers, all these guys were doing were throwing breaking balls when they got to October, and it worked. So the Orioles, they're going to need to find pitchers that can do those types of things. And that's not to say that they don't have some guys that can already do that, but it's definitely going to be a process. But I think anyone that is intrigued by doing things a different way, I think it's going to be fun to see how this plays out. And a lot of it's going to be behind the scenes. They're very much in the mode right now where they're trying to get the garden ready to plant seeds, and it's not a whole lot going on.
First things first. When these guys come in, I know their first thought is, why in the world did you deal off, Machado and Gausman and Scope for a bag of baseballs? You know what I mean? Like I'm sure, in the end, those guys would have handled that very, very valuable, resource differently than let's just blow a bunch of, let's get a bunch of money off of our books with the Braves. So, I'm sure that, because that was part of their game was, how do we take guys that are already in the big leagues that will have immediate help for someone and fleece them, and let's be honest, man, that's Adam Jones is hanging around at the Orioles game on Sunday, right? He's here because Andy McPhail knew how to fleece people, and that really is the game. And I don't know who did the fleecing this summer. I'm guessing for the guy who they propped up like Weekend at Bernie's, who's gone now. I don't know, 5 years from now, it'll be a bunch of names, and we'll find out about these guys. But that's really the shame of it, right? That they come in and didn't have at least a couple of, jacks or kings or aces to deal off, because they don't have anything anymore, right? They have more problems with Chris Davis and finances probably than they do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple guys they could move. I mean, Jonathan VR, I think Michael Givens could absolutely have some trade value, and maybe not right now. Maybe it's at the trade deadline. But, I mean, the timing of this, I mean, they had to move Machado. Certainly we've talked about this how many times that they could have moved him a year ago and would have had better value for him, certainly.
Well, if Scope was going to turn into Mendoza, I mean, what difference would it have made at that point?
Yeah, and that's what I really point to. I mean, they had to deal Machado and Britton. Yes, they should have dealt them sooner than that, but, and I said this to you the day of the trade deadline, or right around then, whenever we kind of broke down what the Orioles received. The Scope deal, I looked at that, I'm like, okay, that's fine. You could have moved him in the offseason. If you remember, Jonathan Scope had a heck of a July, and I really think that trade just he just fell apart probably from a mental standpoint more than anything else. I mean, think about it. This is someone whose closest friend on the team was dealt a couple weeks before that, and he was dealing with that, and he was having a rough season anyway, and he finally had gotten himself straightened out, and then the Orioles trade him to Milwaukee, and I mean, the return they got, okay. But you remember the one that I really hated. The Gausman deal was terrible. I mean, it just was. It was a salary dump. I mean, they wanted to dump his salary for the next 2 years of club control, and the sweetener in it from a financial standpoint was they got to dump Darren O'Day's salary for this coming season. I just think about Gausman alone and what Mike Elias hypothetically could have gotten for him. And I look at what the Tampa Bay Rays got for Chris Archer, which I know Chris Archer is more polished from a perception standpoint and has been to some all-star games. But if you really look over the last 3 seasons, which is really what you should look at, you look at the last calendar year and then you look at the last 3 years. What a guy did 6 or 7 years ago is pretty irrelevant, really, when you're trying to evaluate players and establish
We're going into
value.
2019. Anybody's 2015 stats, I mean, that'll make Chris Davis look worthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you look at what the Rays got for Chris Archer. They got 3 guys that are either top 100 prospects or right on the cusp of it, and the Orioles didn't get 1 for Kevin Gausman. There's something wrong there. That tells you how much that reeked of just being a salary dump, and it's unfortunate because they had already cut so much salary. I mean, you look at what their payroll is probably going to be this year compared to last year. 50%, 55%, 60% of what it was last year. I mean, it's not going to be much. So was that really, should the goal with that trade have been to gain some financial footing, or to how about bring in some talented baseball players that could help you in 2020, 2021? So that's the one move more than the others. I mean, the Machado deal, we'll see about Yusniel Diaz. I know he kind of struggled at Double-A, but talking to some people in the organization, it seems like they think he's still going to be a good player, even if he's not going to be, he's not going to be Bryce Harper. But he can be a good player, and what they got for Britton. I mean, I was kind of surprised they got that much for Zach Britton because we know what Zach Britton's last year has been like.
By the way, there is a passage in Astro Ball late in the book, because everything happens late in the book, that the deal that didn't happen, right, like literally with Britton, was the only reason that they did the Verlander deal.
Yeah.
So if the Orioles didn't back out of the Britton deal, they never would have gotten Verlander. Part of the Verlander thing were the players sort of revolting when they didn't, after years and years and years of saying, when we get good enough, you'll go make a deal, and they got good enough and they didn't make a deal.
Right.
So, so here it is, page 195. Luhnow likely would not have ended up with Verlander had the Orioles not pulled out of the Zach Britton deal. So, Luhnow felt like he had a deal for Zach Britton.
And you really wonder, you think about how critical Verlander was for them in October. Not that Zach Britton couldn't have been a strong contributor for them, but do they win that World Series? So,
well, at least they would have pitched Zach
Series. Is Mike Elias the Orioles general manager right now? So it really, you always think about butterfly effect, and something happens, and then what happens after that. It definitely is one of those things that we could end up looking back on and say maybe in the long term that was better for the Orioles, because who knows if Mike Elias comes, assuming he does a good job here and is able to complete a rebuild that gets this team back to contention at some point in time. That's hopefully not too long from now.
Luke is our guest. He's Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. I'm going to take a moment to talk about all of our cool sponsors. First off, we got some new sponsors around here. Curio on Timonium Road and York Road, just south of Timonium. Actually, just south of Timonium. There you go. Holistic wellness and spa and cannabis education. They're having classes there, teaching folks about medical. Learn. Go to Curio. Go to Curio.com. Stop by. Say hello. See Brian and our friends over at Curio. Also, Strategic Factory. Marketing, printing, promotional goods of all kinds, all in one shop. They make hats like this and shirts like this. If you need signage, printing, branded apparel, any sort of logo designs, giveaways, they also have the strategy to take this stuff and make it work for you. It's Strategic Factory. Don't forget, we are at Pat Rick's in Essex on Tuesday night, swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry with Alex Lewis and Matt Skur from the Baltimore Ravens. Wednesday night, we're at Buffalo Wild Wings in Bel Air at the festival. We got $2.50 pints. Happy hour happening for the Terps and the University of Virginia. Terps going back to the ACC for one night. Also, our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute in Owings Mills. Dr. Craig Bennett going to join us this week with an orthopedic chat. They are the new game plan for sports-related injuries, backed by the surgeons and the doctors who treat pro athletes. I'm telling you, they're out in Owings Mills, right in the Foundry Row. World-class care, and Cal Ripken on the billboards. We'll be telling you more about LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute as well. Cole Roofing, doing it with us 99 3/4 years now, and they are with us as our sponsor, and they do commercial roofs, and Bill Cole brings me the the psychiatrist chair every Wednesday morning. We sit around here and try to make the world a better place. The community and charity series is every Thursday. If you've got a story to tell, I am here to tell it. Toss me an email, nasty@wnst.net. We are talking baseball and Mejdal and Mike Elias and Astro Ball. Luke Jones is here. Look, man, amidst all of this baseball, chatter, there's all the football going on and the Terps getting going. They're not going to do anything too exciting, right? I mean, like that's part of like seeing Astro Ball and reading the book is, well, the first 4 years, all we did was deal away star players, and our general manager was screamed at by everyone. The 800 people that actually showed up at the games. No one was watching the games on TV, and we lost 106, 103, 108, whatever it was, games. And that's going to be the story of 2019 and 20 and 21. That's where this is, which is all the more reason that I'm going to beat the hell out of them about how they treat people like me and like you and like Dennis Colazzos and like Bill Cole and anyone else that I know, because they got to find a reason to hook people like us in on the allure of Mejdal and the legend of Mike Elias, because it's not really going to be about Yusniel Diaz so much right now.
Well, I mean, it's a rebuild. I mean, and Elias said this during his press conference that there are very few shortcuts you can take. I mean, even if right now the Orioles said, we want to have a $200 million payroll, I don't think they could, and we're going to win that way. We're just going to buy a bunch of players this winter. I don't think there's enough quality and that they would have the chances of making enough good decisions to even have a 78-win team doing it that way. So you're in it for the long haul. You're in it for the long run. You've hired people that are good baseball people that are going to do things in a way similar to an organization that's now just a year removed from winning the World Series. So you have to be patient with that. And you certainly need to market, and that's where on the business side, the community outreach side, that there's going to be a ton of pressure. At the same time, they're not going to get 40,000 people to come to the ballpark, no matter what they do. I mean, they're just not, because no one's that interested, no one's that invested, even getting free tickets that you're going to come out there every single night and watch a team that, if they avoid 100 losses, would have to be considered maybe a minor miracle. I mean,
it's going to be a team full of Joey Rickards and Steve Pearces and Ryan Flaherty's. I mean, kind of, sort of, like, it's... I don't even know who's going to be on the team. And if they march Chris Davis out there, it tells me that the old man's sitting up and Mike Elias is signed on for the worst job of his life. I mean, I don't know what else to say, man. You know what I mean? Like, that would be sort of where my sniffer would go, unless they have him at spring training and he hits 297 and looks like he's awake, Well,
and that's the big thing. They're not going to cut him now, and it would be dumb to cut him now, because if these guys are as smart as we think they are, they might be able to make a couple adjustments here and there to make this guy not what he was in 2013, not what he was in 2015. Can you get him back to where he was in 2016? Can you get him even back to where he was in 2017?
Can you get him back to a point where you can pay him and deal him and maybe get 2 prospects?
Well, I don't know if you even get him to that point with given the deal. Although as more time goes on, there's less commitment on the deal. But I think the point is they're going to explore.
There's not less commitment. The Orioles are in for all of it, no matter what.
Well,
right?
I just mean as far as length of the contract. Now, the deferred money, yes. That's going to be a factor for a long, long time.
I mean, if you're paying him and the Oakland A's want to put him in a lineup because he can hit 260 again, and they're willing to give you a pitcher at high A, I don't know. I mean, it's more than I think you're going to get, and more value than even if he hits 28 home runs here next year. Like, what difference does it make?
Right. Well, and that's the problem. I mean, it's clearly a sunk cost to some dramatic degree at this point. It's just a matter of, can you extract any value whatsoever? And I think they're going to explore that now. If he's hitting 160 in June, and first of all, is he still playing? And then second of all, are you going to continue to go down this road any longer, or will you just at that point say it's 100% a sunk cost and this money's torched? This a $160 million contract, or 96 million, 97 million, whatever's left on it at this point, is you lit it on fire. It's gone. So you can either keep sitting there staring at the ashes, or you can move on. And I think they should be much closer to the latter than trying to continue to go down this road. But with a new regime in here, can they make some adjustments? And Elias, he was asked about Chris Davis at the press conference, and he said some flattering things in terms of what an effective Chris Davis can mean for a lineup. But he said, we're going to take a look at everything from his off-season workout regimen to different things we're going to try, and let them try it out. I mean, it's spent either way. No one's being blocked per se, at least at this point. They need to get Trey Mancini out of the outfield, and we saw that, especially with Trumbo going on the DL and missing the end of the season. They got Mancini out of the outfield. He needs to stay out of the outfield. He's either a first baseman or a DH. So the problem right now is you have three guys that fit that description. You have Davis, you have Trumbo for another year, and he's coming off of knee surgery, so trying to deal him at this point anyway is not going to be easy. And you have Mancini. You need to get one of those guys out of the equation. Frankly, you'd like to get Trumbo and Davis out of the equation in a perfect world, but in the meantime, until Ryan Mountcastle's ready to come to the major leagues, and probably he's going to be a first baseman, if not a DH, when the dust settles for him as far as trying to figure out a position for him. Can you salvage Chris Davis to some? And salvage is the wrong word, because you're not salvaging what he was at 5 years ago, but can you get something that was better than one of the worst regular baseball players of all time last year? I mean, can you get him to hit 200 again? Can you get him to have a slugging percentage that's closer to 400 rather than 300? I mean, these are the things.
But is it worth it once you get there? What's the value in it once you get there if you're not getting a high A prospect? Literally, I mean, I don't.
Well, but the thing is, but they're in such a mode right now that you're kind of just plugging in a major league roster. I mean, you look at where
I'm wondering who's going to be on the field. I really am.
Right.
I mean,
so from that standpoint, if the money's spent, is there any downside really to seeing if you can salvage him for the next 6 months and you reassess it in early June? If I mean, to be totally honest, I wouldn't be stunned if they take him to spring training, and if he's as hopelessly lost and terrible as he was this past year, maybe he doesn't travel north with the club. I don't know. This is a new era, so
I can't imagine they're going to let him stumble around another 162 games.
Right. I would think to me, we're getting to a point in the discussion where I think it is very well possible that they cut ties, but I don't think it happens until, if I had to guess, it would be sometime around mid-season.
Hey, man, remember all the Bond stuff? Remember all the A-Rod stuff? And I know that's a whole different story, but like breaking up was so hard. I mean, they broke up with A-Rod, and he still came back and played 2 seasons. It was crazy,
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt, but the numbers were just so bad last year. I mean, he hit. I think people stopped paying attention to the Orioles, but he had a 168 batting average, a 243 on-base percentage, and Nestor, a guy who hit 47 or more home runs twice in his career, he had a 296 slugging percentage. I mean, that's worse than a utility infielder. So that the bar has gotten so low in that regard. I do think,
and they let him come up 500 times in bat. It's crazy.
Sure.
It's insane.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, how many times? And he was still hitting in the middle of the order a lot of times. It was nuts, and that part of it, Buck Showalter.
I mean, but 221, 215, 168. I mean, the trajectory of every OBP, slugging, OPS,
right.
Everything's the wrong direction.
I think if they could get Chris Davis even to 2017 production, which he had a 732 OPS, he had a 215 batting average, but he had 26 home runs. He hit 215. That I'm not saying that that's anything special, and certainly he's not going to be a part of their next playoff winning club, but that's at least bearable. That's at least in the Ryan Howard territory, as we've always kind of compared the Davis deal to the Ryan Howard deal, which the Orioles would sign up in blood right now if they could get Ryan Howard's late career production compared to what Chris Davis did last year. So they're going to try some things, and how receptive Chris Davis is going to be will probably go a long way in determining whether he's going to be on this club much longer. And at some point in time, because it is the Angelos sons who were not the ones who are responsible for this deal that was signed, and we know that it was Peter Angelos driven, this is going to go on, and they're going to try some things. But if he's hitting 165 again, I'd be really surprised if he makes it through a whole season, at least on the 25-man roster. Maybe they manifest an injury and he goes to Sarasota and tries to rebuild himself as a baseball player, and weird things like that play out. But put it this way. If he's going to hit anything close to what he did last year, there's no way in hell he's going to get 470 official at-bats in the major leagues. Those days are over as we're getting this far down the road with a Chris Davis that is not even a shell of what he used to be. I mean, completely, you don't even recognize the guy that he used to be.
We can only hope that Brady Anderson agrees with us. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills all week. We've got Ravens players. We've got a Terps appearance up in Bel Air on Wednesday night at the festival. Come on out and join us. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Charles Nissenhoff & Son since 1923. True love comes in all shapes and sizes. There's something for everyone's budget at Charles Nissenhoff & Sons. They also buy gold. See them in Parkville. You can see them right off the freeway at 695 and Perry Parkway. See my friend Sydney up there and say hello. We're selling our condo, and I tell you what, I am extremely pleased with what we're doing with the Lee Tessier team. Tim is my realtor, but they are Baltimore's premier realty team and the folks that I trust with my real estate transactions with over 50 years of experience helping local buyers and sellers just like you finding the perfect property and getting you in the perfect situation and doing all the negotiating and haggling for you. It's LeeTessier.com. I met Lee through the leukemia space as the Leukemia Lymphoma Society Man of the Year back when my wife was ailing the first time. Great of Lee to sign on with us and help us sell our place. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, the tasty coffee, the best fried chicken in the land. And, of course, if you're downloading the Rofo app or the card, you can do the rewards card, too. You slide that when you're pumping your gas. Get your points. You get your Western fries. You get your fried chicken free of charge. Makes it taste even better. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I also got my Pizza John's cup here on set on my Facebook Live and my YouTube. 113 back River Neck Road, 50 years. They've been doing it. It's shameful, but it's been like a month since I've had a pizza from Pizza John's. I got to get down there this week and do that up. I've been very confused lately because I go in there and I usually bring the pizza home because I want a cheesesteak and I can't have them both. So I eat the cheesesteak sort of like live, and then I take the pizza home and sort of reheat that. And Pizza John's on my stone. Perfect. 50 years. You'll know why. You get to Essex and see our friends at Pizza John's. Luke is here. Last thing, Luke, in this where we are right now, because we're unlike anybody else, we're actually going to talk baseball here this offseason. I'm going to be bright lighting them, not gaslighting them. The managerial thing, and so far it's one thing to engage the fans in the process, and I'm old school, man. I remember when every managerial candidate came in, and the cameras met them downstairs, and they talked to them, and that's a good way to conduct business when no one is going to your games, for me. If you think it's not good to have a public job search, I'll hear that. Maybe the Ravens are about to go through that again, and maybe Steve Bisciotti will want to do it differently this time than having Jason Garrett's wife running around, Caves Valley looking for a place to live. But quiet is the way these guys operate, and discreet and all of that. It's not good for my mojo as a fan. It's not good for our radio station. It's not good for their brand in the offseason. There's a reason that the NFL, that the season will end, but it'll never end. And they'll be looking for a coach, and they'll be looking for coordinators. Then they'll be talking about draft prospects. Then we'll be going to Indianapolis. Then we'll be coming back from Indianapolis. Then we'll have liars' luncheons. Then we'll have a draft. And apparently ABC is going to stop all of its programming for 3 days now and run the draft. And then after the draft, we're going to bring the players in, and we're going to get all excited about whoever the next Ronnie Stanley or C.J. Mosley are. Dude, this whole baseball offseason thing, like there's like a winter carnival going on, and there's like a owners meeting, and I know they're a little ashamed of their 115 losses, but this is a time where guys like me and you want a little bit of trimming to go on with our Christmas tree to say, hey, what are you doing? Get me excited about whatever it is you're doing, even though I know we're going to lose 100 games this year. let me in on all of this right now. And the manager thing, this would be a good time to have us talking about it. And no one's talking about Joe Espada or anyone else for that matter.
Well, and that's part of the issue. I mean, they're not hiring Joe Girardi. I mean, they're not hiring some
Bobby Valentine.
Yeah, they're not hiring another Buck Showalter. I mean, they're just. I'd be really surprised if they hire anyone that a lot of fans have even heard of. To be totally honest,
Not going to be Jim Leyland, is what you're telling me.
I don't mean that to be derogatory to fans, but most casual fans don't know who the bench coach of the Cleveland Indians is. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's very much a case of, and I've said this all along, I can't feign it. I can't fake interest in who their next manager is going to be. I'm not really all that terribly interested in it because I don't think that's going to be their manager when this team's actually good again. I've said all along that whoever they're hiring is much more likely to be Dave Tremblay than Buck Showalter. I mean, it's just the reality of it. Now, I hope they hire someone that is a little bit younger. It doesn't have to be someone really, really young, but younger than Buck Showalter.
I mean, remember when everybody jumped off the cliff in Philly when they hired Kapler last year? Like, it could be the most odd hire ever. I mean, we all just think it's going to be Joe Espada, but I mean, because of the relationship, maybe he doesn't want to come in here and lose 100 games the next 3 years and fly around and play in an empty stadium and be told by the Angelos boys, go out and sell the product, sell the process. And we're going to have process shirts with the Oriole bird on it now, right? Like, I've seen the process for 25 years, Tell me about the process is what I would say,
Yeah, I don't know if they'll be able to have T-shirts because I think the 76ers trademarked the Trust the Process slogan, But that actually, the fact that I'm glad you mentioned that.
I'm looking for synonyms now for process, by the
way. Right.
Way.
I think that plays into what you were just saying about not being as forthcoming about this, not being as public about this. I'm guessing, and they probably got some no's from
it's probably not an attractive gig, literally, right?
That's the thing. I mean,
you dream of being a manager if you're Joe Espada and you've been doing this. You've been hanging out with Brian Cashman. You've been hanging out with world champions. The hell do you want to come here and lose for 4 years?
I mean, let's face it. Do we remember who the Astros manager was before Hinch?
Bo Porter. There you go.
Yeah. So, and look, I mean, Bo Porter took a lot of bullets in the same way that Dave Tremblay took a lot of bullets here in Baltimore. And, he was the manager when they lost 30-3, and, they had some absolutely woeful teams, even though the likes of Adam Jones and Nick Markakis and Matt Wieters were coming through the pipeline and had even arrived at the major league level. So it is a tough sell, and that's where I'm okay with them not wanting to be as public with the search, because quite frankly, they could leak some names out there, and then candidates A, B, and C say, thanks, but no thanks. I really like the job I have right now with the winning team I have right now, that I think we've got a great chance to win the World Series in the next year or two, and then I'm an even more attractive candidate. Or, but there's also the school of thought of sometimes, and we've talked about this how many times in the NFL, where there's the hot shot coordinator that decides to stick, and then the shine comes off the apple, and they never do get that head coaching gig. So, there's always that side of it is one of 30 jobs, and there's only a few available any given winter. So, they'll find someone, and I'm guessing it's not going to be someone that's going to get anyone that terribly excited. But this team could bring back the reincarnation of Casey Stengel, and I don't think it's selling any tickets in 2019 because they're going to be really bad. And so you want a manager who's going to implement what your vision is as an organization from an analytics standpoint, from a whatever the quote new Oriole way is going to be in terms of how you play. So you want a manager who's going to carry that out. You want a manager that's going to use analytical information and embrace that, and have a coaching staff that's going to embrace that, and that's going to be shared with the players. And you want a manager, and this is where you do look at the current state of the 25-man roster, the major league club. You do want a manager that's going to be a little more nurturing, probably, because these guys are going to do a lot more losing over the next, at least over the next year or two. You hope.
You need a manager to massage temples and align chakras.
It's not that literal.
Sacrifice chickens.
You do need a manager who is going to have to walk that fine line between knowing when to give a young player a kick in the tail and when to pat them on the back, because it's going to be really tough here over the next couple of years. I mean, best case scenario, I think a best case scenario would be maybe the second half of 2021. You're starting to see some inroads. You're starting to see them play 500 kind of baseball. You're starting to see some young players really look like they're figuring it out. That's kind of the best case here. So what does that mean? 2019 and 2020 are going to be horrendous, and 2021 is probably not going to be much better, at least the first half of the season. So with that in mind, you do need to have a manager who doesn't need to be a sports psychologist. I'm not saying it has to be that extreme.
We need someone like Lou Brown. We need to bring Lou Brown in here.
But you are going to need someone who relates to young players, gets them to play the right way, gets them to do things the way that the Orioles are wanting to do things as an organization, and also be able to put your arm around a guy when he's struggling or when the team is not doing well.
Promise me that when they're playing 280 ball in June one night, you'll take the night off. We'll just watch Major League instead.
Right. But also, not just someone who's going to relate to the players, but you need to find a manager who's going to have a strong resolve about that, because I can say this, there are a lot of managers who would not be cut out for that, and I saw the toll that it took on Buck Showalter, even though I think he still handled himself well, regardless of how anyone was feeling about him or Dan Duquette or the organization.
Yeah, it's not a gig for Lou Piniella to come in here knowing he's going to lose 300 games.
Right. I mean, my goodness. I mean, some guys would burn down their office. I mean, it really is it's not an attractive job. As much as I think, and I said this to you long before they hired Elias, I thought this would be an attractive job for a general manager who's looking to build from the ground up. This is not an attractive managerial job right now. It's just not. And really, it's going to be just finding someone that can come in and be a good caretaker.
I have the next couple summers free. I mean, I'm letting you know. I'm available. I look young.
If they can find the next Earl Weaver by accident, great. But just give me someone that's going to do what's best for young players and show them how to play the right way and embrace what the front office is doing. And I'm good with it beyond that, whether it's Joe Espada or whoever the unknown name might be that they're going to hire. I would think here in the next couple weeks as we get closer to the winter meeting.
I want to see Lou Brown manage this group. Good-looking young ball players. He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage can be found in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Our friends at Buy a Toyota have been there from the beginning. We are going to be podcasting, as the kids call it. You can download what you want, when you want, how you want from the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Our morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com, where it's always $5 down, $10 a month, and it's warm inside. It's perfect. Also, it's warm inside the fantastic remodeled sports bar down in Laurel Park. Get on down this weekend, watch the races. It's winter time, but it's warm inside there. Also, the football game's on as well. If you haven't been to Laurel Park lately, you haven't been there at all, get down and see what all the hubbub is about. The entries on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. Breaking news when it happens first on the WNST text service, including the Orioles manager. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, getting you ready for football and more football as the Ravens go on the road here and try to make it happen with the Lamar Jackson, Joe Flacco show, whatever that means. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.